right, getting going. Bad news. Okay, here we go. There we go. My screen is crooked this morning. That's okay. Good morning, Chris. Up early this morning. All right, I'm getting ready, getting established, getting set up, grabbing my book. Man. Morning, Pat, John. Good to see you guys. Good morning, Judy. My mouse is not working, of course. Pat, I don't need any comments. Don't need comments, Pat. Good morning, Drew and Lori. I don't know. I guess that's a thing. Ooh, what just happened? Okay. Well, that's okay, I guess. Pat, I don't need it. I don't need it. Pat's gonna tell me about how I don't want it. Shouldn't use a Mac. All right, guys. Good morning. Welcome back. Thank you guys for waking up again this morning. Hope you had a good day yesterday. I had a pretty eventful day working on cars. I don't work on cars, but I worked on cars yesterday, and I joke about the curse of cars. And so I was changing spark plugs, which I don't even change spark plugs. I'm telling you, something as simple as changing spark plugs when I'm doing it is not as simple as changing spark plugs. And we got 3 of them out, and we got to the 4th one, and the ratchet broke inside the car, inside with the spark plug. Like, not the spark plug didn't break, the engine didn't break, the ratchet actually broke. So I think I've been working out too much or something. That's amazing. So my car's being worked on today, but the day ended with massive blessing. So good morning and afternoon, Darren and Estelle. Good to have you guys. Good morning, Claire. All right. Man, mornings. It's morning. I feel groggy this morning, but that's okay. Good morning, Becky. YouTube is better? Better? Okay. I like having people on both. The only downside to having YouTube and Facebook going at the same time is there are times where I've thought, man, it would be really cool. Good morning, Susan. That it would be really cool to be able to take maybe my phone and do this somewhere other than my office, and that becomes more difficult if I have to do it on 2 devices as I'm doing. So there may be some special times where we break away from YouTube and just do Facebook. Right now they're even though. Usually it's a race, and usually Facebook's winning the race. Right now there's 7 on YouTube and 7 on Facebook. So yeah. It's pouring rain in San Diego. Not that you care, because it's probably frozen and snowing where you're at. Morning, Matt. But it is pouring rain, and we need it. Keeps fires from burning, something like that. Keeps our plants growing. Hey, let's pray and jump in here, guys. Thank you for being patient with me for a couple minutes as we waited for some people. I think we got some people on. Let's pray. Lord, we are again, we're before you, asking you to speak, Lord, to teach us. We're in a very familiar section today, and we just pray that you would help us to see it in a new way and really just to apply it in our lives. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, guys, you ready? I'm ready. Born ready, right? That was the comment yesterday. Here we go. So my mouse doesn't work. That means I have to reach over here every once in a while. So we are in Matthew chapter 22. We're going to finish out Matthew 22, starting in verse 34. Now, if you remember, Jesus is being really kind of examined. I mean, he's just going through this process of people asking him questions. He is in Jerusalem. He knows that his time is coming where he will be revealed as the Messiah, but not as anyone thinks. he is going to die. He's going to be crucified on a cross. He's going to be tortured. He's going to be beaten. The Bible tells us that when they beat him, they will beat him beyond the recognition of a man, but they keep him alive. Then they nail him to some wood and they hang him up on a hill for everybody to see. They'll put a sign on his head, and this is the work of God. Truly, that sin will be judged in this moment, and that he will be revealed as the Messiah, lifted up above all, and take away the sin of us. And so this is coming for Jesus, but before it comes, as he is it's the Feast of Passover. There are millions of people who have made their way to Jerusalem as well during this time. It's a celebration time. It's a party time. It's a time where the sacrificial lamb, they're remembering the time where there was the blood of the lamb that was shed to save the lives of the firstborn in Egypt thousands of years before. Now Jesus is to fulfill that was actually a prophetic picture of Jesus. Now this is something to remember. The Old Testament is speaking just as much of Jesus as the New Testament is. The Old Testament is all about Jesus, that we are to look for Jesus in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is all the stuff that was written before Jesus even came on the scene. Nancy and Sandy are here, but they're on Nancy's account. Awesome. So Jesus is fulfilling this picture. This, when the lamb was killed in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, when they were being delivered from the hand of Pharaoh, even what was happening was a picture of what was to happen to Jesus. And so the lamb was to be inspected for 5 days before it was slaughtered. Now Jesus is really, he's come into Jerusalem, and there are 5 days before he will be crucified. And during that time, they're asking him questions. We looked at a couple of the questions yesterday. Today, we're going to look at a couple of more questions. So, verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees. Now remember, the Sadducees were the guys, they didn't believe in the spiritual stuff. They didn't believe in an afterlife, a resurrection from the dead. They didn't believe in, they did not believe in angels and demons. They just, it was just kind of religion for the sake of religion for the sake of let's just do good things and let's be good people, and that the blessing will all come here and now in this life, and it's not about the spiritual realm. If you missed that, go ahead and listen to it or just read through it and you'll see what happened. Good morning, Brad and Cindy. Getting some more people on. Awesome. Can you guys hear the rain? It's coming down out there. I'm in a rainstorm. So good. So the Pharisees were the ones who believed in the spiritual things. Now the Pharisees heard that Jesus silenced the Sadducees. Now the Sadducees and Pharisees would have debated with one another, and they'd make their points, and the Sadducees would make their points. And they go back and forth. But Jesus, in discussion with them, he just shut them up. He just silenced them. They heard that he silenced the Sadducees, and they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. That's been all of the questions, to test him. They're not asking questions to learn. There's different ways to ask questions, right? There are times when we're in discussion to learn, to grow. We ask questions because we want to know something that we previously did not know. And then there are times that we ask questions just to try to trip somebody up. Good morning, Robin. I'm sorry. I just love seeing you guys' names popping up on here. Sometimes we just ask questions to trip people up. We ask questions to lead people somewhere. If you notice here, the one who's asking him this question is a lawyer. Isn't that how lawyers ask questions? They kind of lead in the movies. I don't know. I've not been in the courtroom, but they kind of lead the witness to a certain place. They're asking questions to be like, well, where were you? Well, then if you were there, then how could you have been here? So the whole point is to trip him up. And so here he asks him this question: Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? What is the most important commandment? Now, the Pharisees read through the scriptures, studied the scriptures. They learned as much as they could. They valued understanding. They valued learning as much as they could, knowing as much as they could, being smarter than everybody else when it came to the things of the scriptures. And they had come up with 613 different rules in the Old Testament. There are 1,600 or 1600s, 613 different commandments of God in the Old Testament. Rules. They had their list. Now we could, we talk a lot about the main 10, the 10 commandments. Hey, you should put the 10 commandments on a wall. You should put them in school, and we get all huffy puffy about how they took them off the walls in schools, I don't know, years ago, and how society has taken a downturn since the 10 Commandments were not on the walls. Well, the 10 Commandments is just 10 of them. The Pharisees, as they would go through the scriptures, discovered that there are actually 613 rules in the Old Testament, laws in the Old Testament. And so they come knowing these laws in the Old Testament, and they come to Jesus and they say, which is the greatest? What's the most important rules and laws that God has given? Verse 37, and he said to him, now Jesus does not always answer directly. Oftentimes he answers a question with a question. Maybe he takes the discussion where he wants it to go. In this time, he answers very directly. They ask him, which is the greatest commandment? And he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. That's the first and greatest commandment. That to love God is the greatest commandment. If you miss everything else, if you don't know all 613, if you don't even know all 10, the greatest, if you're going to pursue one, pursue this one. Love God. That is the greatest commandment, to love God. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, this is man, it feels very kind of out there, right? I mean, it just feels like, all right, love God. How do you love God? How do I do it? Is it going to church? Is it reading my Bible? Because I think of truly, there is a little bit of discussion as to what is love. Is love just a feeling that you feel, or is love something that you do? Is it both? You guys all have opinions on that. I've got opinions on that, but what is this love for God? How do we have this love for God? I honestly, I believe that there ought to be some affection tied to our love, and yet at the same time, I feel oftentimes that our affections don't go towards God. We're just like, I know I'm supposed to love God, and I'm going through the motions. I'm doing the duties that I'm supposed to do by being a Christian that loves God. But truly, I don't know oftentimes that there is the affection that I am to have. Now, so how do we cultivate an affection for God? How do we learn to love God? The Bible tells us that the one who is forgiven much loves much. The one who is blessed by God, the one who receives from God. I believe that love for God is in response to Him. It's understanding who we are before Him. It's coming and recognizing that we're not bringing a lot of substance to Him. We are not bringing goodness to Him. We're not offering. We are responding to the fact that He loves us. And so we need to focus. There's story after story of the people who loved God are the ones who he was good to them, and they knew that they did not deserve it. When we come saying, you know what, I deserve it. I've done so many good things. I've followed the commandments, so I must love God more. But it's truly the ones who are the ones who have been distant from God, and He has gone after them. We see the story of the 99 or the 100 sheep, and the shepherd goes after the one that strays off, and he leaves the 99. I tell you what, the one that he went after, the one that he went and he put it on his shoulders and carried it back to the sheepfold, that's the sheep that will love him the most. That's the sheep that will respond because, hey, he went after me. And so oftentimes the ones who love God the most are the ones, not the ones who have been the most obedient, but the ones who have been truly the most disobedient. Is that to say that we should be disobedient? No, it's recognizing just how good He's been to us. That this is somewhere where I feel that I live in this state of just constant undeserved blessing. And I'm grateful for that, but yet at the same time, man, it's just so humbling. I've earned nothing. The more that I recognize how much God has done for me, I look around and I'm just like, God, I don't see a lot of other people who live this way. And I don't say that against them. I say that in their favor. I look at other people and I say, man, they've earned their position in life. They've worked hard to be where they are. They've done more good things than I've done. They've been, they're better, better parents than I am. And yet my kids have a great relationship with me. They're better husbands than I am. And yet I have, in my opinion, a better wife than they have. They work harder than I do, and I have a better position than they do. So many things where I just like, Lord, you've been so good to me. You've blessed me in so many ways. And I tell you, that causes me to just be in this humble, like, Lord, I guess I love you. I guess I guess that's what that feeling is that just responds. It's not something that I am like working up. I'm not trying to, okay, I got to get myself to love him, but truly, man, as I see him being good to me, I respond in love to him. And I think that that's you as well. As you focus on the good that he's done, you will love him. If you do not focus, if you focus on all of the problems, how many people have I met who've been angry at God? I remember a girl that I worked with years and years and years ago, and she said, I don't want to follow God. I don't believe that there is a God, because if there was a God, he wouldn't have let me go through the things that I've gone through. He wouldn't have allowed me to go through this kind of pain. And so for her, she deserved something better than she got, and she blamed God for it. And that's a sad state. It's this girl who looked at God and said, man, God could have kept me from having the types of pain that I've had in my life. And I deserved to live a life where I didn't have this kind of pain. And so I don't love God. I'm not going to follow God. And truly, I honestly would say, I think that the problem is just where we're focusing. I mean, here's a girl who lived, this was in California where I worked with her. And here's this girl that lives in this, perfect climate in the richest nation that's ever existed in the world, having access to, here she has access to a job that pays her money. She has a car that she drives to work. She has luxuries that no king has ever had in the history of the world. And all she can see is, the pain that she's experienced, not the blessings that she's had, not the family and friends that she did have, as she did have them, but only the pain that she had experienced. And she's like, no, God would have allowed me to go through that. And so it created in her this lack of love for God. I believe that love for God is truly, it's the greatest commandment, but it's also a response. It's a response to his love for us. The Bible tells us that we love him because he first loved us. The Bible tells us that the one who's forgiven much loves much. That the one who, as we recognize what he's done for us, that's where our love for him comes. So how in action do we love God? Well, that is where he continues to go. He says, this is verse 38. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. Now, this idea of the second being like it is that the second is linked to it. That you cannot have the first commandment without the second commandment. They're linked together. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend, and I think some of the older translations say hang all the law and the prophets. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So the second commandment is like it. The second commandment is like it. It's equal to it. It's, well, not equal to it. There is still the first and the second. The first is loving God. This is important, I think, to know. We can love people without loving God. I believe we can do that. And it's not good. We're missing the first and greatest commandment, the most important one, to love God. But the Bible will tell us over and over, especially in the writings of John, we cannot love God and hate people. We can't do that. Now, we can love people without loving God, but we can't love God without loving people. If we say that we love God and we hate our neighbor, we're liars. That's what John says. If we say that we love him, how can we say that we love God who we have not seen and yet hate our neighbor who we have seen? So those of us, as we ask the question, do I love God? We can see it being lived out and worked out in our love for one another, in our love for others. And if we don't have a love for others, we can say, well, then I must not love God. How can I say that I love God and hate my neighbor who's made in the image of God? And so they are linked together. Now, we got to be careful, because the love for God is not necessarily love for people. There are people who just naturally, we love people, or maybe we're around people that we like. And so we think, man, I'm doing good because I'm loving people. But all the while, we really have no affection for God. We have no understanding of what God has done for us. And we love people like we love our puppy. We love people because we think, you know what, I deserve love. They love me. I love them back. But Jesus gives us this love for people, not based upon, you know, hey, this is this mutual love, that I deserve it. Because oftentimes, man, we can look at even our relationships, and people measure up to our standards, and that's why we love them. We don't love them because God told us to love them or because we're humble, but because they measure up to our standards. And so there may be some people that we love and other people that we don't love. And we love the neighbor who lives on the right side of our house because, man, they measure up. They keep their yard clean. They're quiet at night. They do everything we want them to do. But then we hate the neighbor who lives on the left side of the house because the neighbor on the left side of the house is noisy, and he's, playing his music at 4 a.m. and he's leaves his car running in the morning, and just all these different rules that we have, and they don't measure up to our standards, so we don't love them. But there's a need for us to respond in love to because God loved us. We love people, and we recognize, you know what, I don't necessarily, I don't need them or deserve for them to treat me greatly. You know, Jesus is one. He says, love your enemies. Now that's the real stretch, right? As we say, love your neighbor. Jesus will even show them who their neighbor is in a story at, different points in the gospel, where he talks about the Samaritan, the one that they hated, the one that, was so different from them, the one that they had theological differences with. They had, the Samaritans were the people, the Jews and the Samaritans hated each other. You think about, just the racism in the world, or the conflicts in the Middle East, and Jesus would point to the one that they were most at odds with, and he would say, that is your neighbor. That is the one that you are to love. Man, I currently am blessed to be around and to be part of a church where this church does very well this love one another. They love one another well. They love the world well. They go and they do missions. They reach out to third world countries, but then they are so amazingly giving and generous to one another. My pastor, who's my neighbor, literally, and a friend, I met him, 6 months ago, 8 months ago. And we've been part of this church, and he was over at my house breaking spark plugs in my car with me, helping me. We had a guy, they found out I had a brake issue on my car, and I had a guy at the church, one of the guys that works in the sound ministry, and he knows about cars, and he came over and helped me kind of work on my brakes, and they're just so giving. I mean, the amount of generosity that we've received, it's very humbling, because here I am responding to the blessing that's coming my way, and feeling like, Lord, I don't deserve this. I don't have any way to pay people back. I don't know why you're so good in these ways. My phone's falling down. But you've blessed me in so many ways, and it's amazing to be around a community of people who is so generous and so giving and so loving towards one another, and loving toward the world, and so willing to give of themselves to travel and serve in third world countries. We went to Belize with some of them this last summer. They've taken 2 trips to Haiti in the last 2 months. Just orphanages. And in the book of James says, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. That the call of the believer, the call of the Christian, is to love God with all your heart, greatest commandment. And the second is linked to it, to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, here's a trip, right? You and I'm going to finish it up with this. I think that this is an amazing insight. Here's the trip. You and man, I don't know about you. When I read this, I'm like, Lord, I love you. But I, like Peter, I don't think I love you with all my heart, with all my mind, with all my strength. I don't think I do. I think that there's a gap between my love for you and your love for me. I don't love you as much as I should. And now let's go. The second is linked to it, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Lord, I don't love my neighbor as myself. I love myself so much more than I love my neighbor. I know that I do. And so, what do I do with that? Well, I love this. Listen. Oh, man, I lost my spot. Where are we at? Here we go. You know what? Oh, man, we got so much further to go. I didn't realize that. He says, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. On what hangs the law and the prophets? How is this perfectly lived out? It was perfectly lived out in Jesus. Jesus, the cross, represents this perfect picture of these two commandments being fulfilled. The vertical, the pole that goes into the ground that holds up the other pole. The cross, the wood that goes into the ground and points up towards heaven, is part of the cross. And then the other part, the wood that goes horizontal, spreading out to stretch out arms. The cross itself is the picture of perfect love for God and perfect love for man. And Jesus fulfilled it. The commandments were hung on Jesus on the cross, and he perfectly fulfilled the two greatest commandments. That in his love for God, his submission to the Father, in obedience, he goes to the cross and saying, Lord, whatever you say, I will do. Jesus did perfectly, laid down his life. And then what he was called to do, God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And so Jesus was stretched out, his arms stretched out on the cross, nailed to the cross in a horizontal, bringing all men to himself. That sin was conquered, that the commandments were fulfilled in Christ on the cross. And so we, even though we fall short of the two greatest commandments, Jesus did not fall short of the two greatest commandments. That Jesus fulfilled the greatest commandments, to love God and to love people absolutely perfectly. And so you and I, even though we fall short, we look to Jesus and we say, he fulfilled it. Yes, I failed. Yes, I've fallen short of the call of God. Even if you take away 613 commandments, you take away 611 of them, and you leave only two, I still fall short of those two. And those two are the two greatest. And Jesus fulfilled them. And so I look to Jesus and I say, you know what? If unless his finished work on the cross is enough, I'm not going to make it based upon the fact that I loved God enough. I'm not going to make it based upon the fact that I loved people enough. Now, does that take us off the hook that we're not supposed to do that? No, we are in response to that to seek to live it out, to take up our cross and to perfectly love God and to perfectly love people. But we know that we're going to fail. And so we still, to this day, we look to Jesus and we say, his work is enough. And we are humbled in that, saying his work is enough, and I will follow after him, and I will do like he does, but I know that I'm going to come short because I'm not him. And so it's not going to be me who gets the glory and who gets man, I did it perfectly, but it's going to be him that gets all the glory, that it's his name that will be elevated above every name. Okay? You know what? We're going to blast through this last little section really quickly. Verse 41, now while the Pharisees were gathering together, Jesus asked them a question, saying, what do you think about the Christ? So Jesus turns it back to them. What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? And they said to him, the son of David. And he said to them, how is it then that David, in the Spirit, calls him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. Now he's speaking from the Psalms. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies till I put your enemies under your feet. If then David calls him Lord, how is it, or how is he his son? And no one was able to answer him a word, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. So Jesus turns the tables a little bit. He brings up a question to them. He says, whose son is the Messiah, the one to come, the one that you're waiting for? As they don't want to believe that it's Jesus because he's not fitting into their mold. He says, whose son is the Messiah? They say, oh, the Messiah comes from the line of David. So truly the Messiah is a descendant of David. And now if you were the son of someone, then you were you were inferior to, the greater authority, the greater of the two. The son would call the father Lord, but the father would never call the son Lord. The father would never elevate the son above himself. And so Jesus says, well, whose son is the Messiah? And what their response was, well, we know that the Messiah is the son of David. And he's like, well, then how is it that David calls the Messiah his Lord? How is it that David elevates the Messiah above himself? How is this the case? And here's the answer to Jesus' question. The Messiah is the Son of God. The Messiah, Jesus, is the Son of God. Yes, coming through the line of David, but even David understood, no, the one to come is greater. So I feel like we could sit on that for a little bit longer, but we're not going to. It is 6:33. And I do want you guys to just hang out with this idea that the two greatest commandments, I know that we've kind of beat this down pretty good. The two greatest commandments, number one, love God. Choose to love God. And how do we do that? We focus on the blessings and on the grace and the mercy that he has shown to us. And then in response to that, linked to it, we love others, knowing that we are not all that we think that we are. We love others as we love ourselves. And whether you know this or not, you don't hate yourself. You love yourself. It's just natural within you to love yourself. And I know that I love myself. And yet the call is, then love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, and then as you fall short of that, remember, Jesus fulfilled it perfectly. And your righteousness is not based on your effort to do it perfectly. Your righteousness is based on the fact that he does it for you. So God bless you guys. Thank you for joining again today. Tomorrow we're going to get into chapter 23. I hope you'll come back and join us at 6 a.m. I love having you guys' names pop up on the screen. Man, thank you. See you guys tomorrow. Remember, focus on the blessings that God's given to you. There's more than you know. Lean into his grace. Thank you, guys. God bless you. See you tomorrow. I'm just reading your comments. You guys keep going. I got. See you guys.